Alright, let's go. Most prehistoric humans did not die where they were born. They moved. Across deserts, coastlines, frozen plains, mountain passes, and stretches of open water that should have killed them long before they reached the other side. No maps, no metal, no roads, no rescue if something went wrong. Just memory, weather, hunger, and whatever the group could carry. These are 10 prehistoric journeys humans somehow survived. Number 10. Leaving Africa. Around 70,000 years ago, small groups of Homo sapiens began moving out of Africa through the northeast and the Arabian edge. This sounds simple on a map. It was not simple in the body. To leave Africa meant crossing territory with unfamiliar predators, unfamiliar water sources, and climate that changed faster than rumour could. At sites like Mislia Cave in Israel, dated to around 177,000 years ago for an earlier wave, and later Arabian evidence like Al-Wusta, we find proof that humans kept trying this route again and again. Most of those attempts probably failed. That is the important part. When we say humans left Africa, we are compressing thousands of dead-end journeys into one sentence. The people who made it out were not the first to try. They were the first whose children survived long enough to keep going. Number 9. Into Ice Age Europe. By 45,000 years ago, humans were pushing into Europe, which sounds exciting until you remember what Europe contained at that moment. Neanderthals, cave lions, cave hyenas, a climate that could turn vicious in a week. The earliest modern humans entering Europe were not walking into empty land. They were entering a continent already occupied by another human species that had survived there for hundreds of thousands of years. At Bachokiro in Bulgaria, one of the earliest modern human sites in Europe, the evidence suggests these arrivals were carrying Aurignacian tools, personal ornaments, and a body built for movement rather than brute cold adaptation. They survived because they brought range, social range, symbolic range, technological range, that the journey itself would have felt like trespassing in a world that was not built for them, and the fact that they stayed is one of the most improbable things our species ever managed. Number 8. Across the Green Sahara. The Sahara was not always the Sahara. During the African humid period, lakes and grasslands stretched across huge parts of what is now dead desert, which sounds like good news until you remember what happens when a green corridor dries. People get trapped in movement. Ancient populations crossed this wetter Sahara, while it was still alive enough to support them, then had to keep moving as the climate shut the door behind them. Rock art, buried river systems, and occupation sites show that this was not a casual passage but a continental migration route that came with one terrifying rule: if you misread the water, you died. The Green Sahara was a bridge that expired while people were still using it. Some groups made it to the Nile, some to the Maghreb, some south again. The lucky ones arrived before the land forgot how to hold water. Number 7. The Arctic Push. At Yana Rhinoceros Horn Site in Siberia, archaeologists found evidence of humans living above the Arctic Circle around 31,000 years ago. Let that sit for a second. Humans in the high Arctic before the last glacial maximum. Not just passing through, living there, hunting there, making tools there. This is one of the most absurdly hard environments any human group ever chose on purpose. Winter darkness, wind exposure, frozen ground, huge distances between resources. A body without enough fat could simply stop being a body there. Yet they made it work. They were processing mammoth ivory, using sophisticated stone tools, and surviving in temperatures modern people would struggle to tolerate for a few hours with proper gear. The Arctic Push proves that by 31,000 years ago, humans were not just adapting to difficult environments, they were selecting them. Number 6. Through Beringia. People talk about the Bering Land Bridge as if it were a free walkway into America. It was not. Beringia was not just a strip of land, it was a full ecosystem of cold steppe, wind, drought, and enormous distance. If you crossed it, you did not cross in a week. You moved through it over generations, maybe centuries. You hunted there, buried there, lost children there, waited there for the ice to open. This is where the old migration story gets too neat. At White Sands in New Mexico, human footprints dating to roughly 23,000 years ago suggest humans were already in North America during the last glacial maximum, which means some populations had already made it through or around the ice much earlier than the textbook model once allowed. Beringia did not lead to America. It trapped, filtered, and tested the people trying to move through it. Number 5. Down the Pacific edge. Once people reached the Americas, some groups moved south with astonishing speed. Monteverde in Chile is over 14,000 years old, and possibly there were even earlier occupations farther north. However exactly they moved, they did not do it through some easy corridor of open land and good weather. They likely hugged coasts, estuaries, and river mouths, living in a narrow interface between sea and land, where food was available, but danger was constant. Coastal migration sounds romantic until you remember what coasts mean in prehistory: cold surf, shifting tides, storms, cliffs, and one mistake becoming a body never found. The distance from Alaska to southern Chile is enormous. The time between first entry and secure occupation is unbelievably short. Humans did not stroll into the Americas. They raced the edge of a continent and won. Number 4. Up onto the Tibetan Plateau. Ancient humans did not just survive cold, they survived thin air. At Noya Davu on the Tibetan Plateau, researchers found stone tools at an altitude of more than 15,000 feet, dated to around 30 to 40,000 years ago. That is mountain death altitude for an unadapted human body. Low oxygen changes everything. Thinking, walking, childbirth, sleep, healing. People who went up there without adaptation would have been hit by headaches, vomiting, weakness, and confusion before they even understood what was happening. The populations that eventually made the plateau survivable carried genetic help from Denisovans, the EPAS1 variant, that allows Tibetans today to function where other bodies fail, which means one of the hardest prehistoric journeys humans survived was only possible because another human species had already solved part of the biological problem first. Number 3. To Okinawa. This one should bother more people than it does. By around 30,000 years ago, humans had reached the Ryukyu Islands, including Okinawa. That means they crossed open sea against the Kuroshio Current, one of the strongest ocean currents in the world in watercraft that have not survived. This is one of the most underrated voyages in human history. Australia gets the attention. Fine, but Okinawa may be more technically insane. You cannot drift there easily. You have to aim. You have to know something about current, timing, weather, and where land probably is beyond the horizon, which means somewhere 30,000 years ago, a group of humans stood on a coast in East Asia, looked out at water trying very hard to kill them, and pushed off anyway. That is not migration. That is nerve. Number 2. Across the Alps. 5,300 years ago, a man we now call Tsi was moving through the Alps when he died. He is not Ice Age old, but he is prehistoric, and his journey gives us something migration studies rarely do: a body in motion. His clothing, his tools, the unfinished repairs he was carrying, the food in his stomach, the arrow in his shoulder, all of it, tells us that prehistoric travel through mountain systems was not clean and deliberate and heroic. It was tense. Improvised, slow risk layered on risk. To cross a mountain pass with a body, a kit, and no margin for weather error is one thing. To do it while wounded, hungry, or pursued is another. Tsi did not survive his journey. That is exactly why he matters. Most prehistoric crossings vanish into success. He preserved the cost. Number 1. To Sahul. The hardest prehistoric journey humans ever survived was the one that should not have happened at all. At least 65,000 years ago, humans reached Sahul, the Ice Age landmass that combined Australia and New Guinea. There was no land bridge from Sunda to Sahul. Even at the lowest sea levels, they had to cross open ocean. Not one person. A viable founding population. Enough men, women, children, knowledge, and tools to start life on the other side, and not simply disappear. At Majid Bay in northern Australia, the archaeological record forces the issue. Humans were there that early, which means someone built watercraft before the wheel, before pottery, before agriculture, and used them well enough to find land they probably could not clearly see from where they launched. This is not just a migration. It is the first great human leap into the unknown. And that is why it sits at number 1. Because every other journey on this list is difficult in ways the body can imagine: cold, hunger, altitude, distance, predators. But sailing into open water without certainty that the other side exists is a different category of courage. Somewhere 65,000 years ago, a child sat in a boat made by hands that had never seen the place they were heading. The adults around them had no chart, no compass, no spare vessel, no coast guard, and no guarantee that the horizon held anything except more horizon. They went anyway, and somehow, impossibly, they lived long enough for you to be here reading about it now.